The President of the United States, George W. Bush, deserves great credit. This will be, if the President did nothing else in his administration, this is justification enough for his legacy to be looked back on favorably because of the phenomenal and dramatic impact this initiative has and will have in the rest of the world. I yield the floor.
That was Democratic Senator from Delaware, Joe Biden, July 15th, 2008. And here's Senator Biden the next day.
But I must say, the President of the United States has led us to this incredible moment where this is the single largest effort on the part of any country in the history of the world to go out and literally save the lives of and extend the lives of tens of millions of people. This is a gigantic accomplishment. So first, the credit should go to President Bush.
What prompted such lavish back-to-back praise in 2008 for Republican President George W. Bush from future Democratic President Joe Biden? PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. The multi-billion-dollar government initiative to address the global HIV/AIDS epidemic turns 20 years old this week. President Bush signed PEPFAR into law on May 27, 2003. When it was proposed and implemented 20 years ago, PEPFAR was the largest commitment by any nation to combat a single disease in human history. Now, to mark PEPFAR's 20th anniversary, we hear directly from the politicians involved in the program and the bipartisan tone the initiative set for Washington and for President Bush, as C-SPAN's podcast The Weekly presents a special episode, PEPFAR, an Oral History. The PEPFAR story begins on January 28, 2003, President Bush's second State of the Union address.
Ladies and gentlemen, seldom has history offered a greater opportunity to do so much for so many. We have confronted and will continue to confront HIV/AIDS in our own country. And to meet a severe and urgent crisis abroad, tonight I propose the Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, a work of mercy beyond all current international efforts to help the people of Africa. This comprehensive plan will prevent 7 million new AIDS infections, treat at least 2 million people with life-extending drugs, and provide humane care for millions of people suffering from AIDS and for children orphaned by AIDS. I ask the Congress to commit $15 billion over the next 5 years, including nearly $10 billion in new money, to turn the tide against AIDS in the most afflicted nations of Africa and the Caribbean.
Why PEPFAR? Josh Bolten explains. When President Bush proposed PEPFAR in the 2003 State of the Union address, Josh Bolten was President Bush's Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy. He spoke on a 2018 panel marking PEPFAR's 15th anniversary.
You know, interestingly, I was the policy director of President Bush's 2000 campaign, and I do not remember this issue coming up. In fact, I do not remember Africa coming up during the campaign. We had a policy book of, a couple of hundred pages long. I see some folks in the audience who actually participated in that. And there was, I correct myself, there was mention of Africa, but addressing the AIDS pandemic was not one of the 100-plus issues on which President Bush campaigned. But early on in the administration, he was moved by the passion about some members of Congress. Two of them are here on this stage, Senator Frist, among others. And he was moved by what he was told by his Secretary of State, Colin Powell, and by his National Security Advisor, Condi Rice, who briefed him extensively on the crisis that was happening in Africa.
President Bush signed PEPFAR on May 27, 2003 in the White House. On stage right next to him, Senator Joe Biden. In fact, the first hand that President Bush shook after signing PEPFAR belonged to Joe Biden. Also in attendance that day for the signing ceremony, the director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci. He appeared on C-SPAN's Q&A program in 2015.
Then when George W. Bush came in, I had met him originally when he was a staffer in the White House with his father. And we struck up a very good relationship, and I think that that was one of the reasons why he sent me to Africa in 2002 for the purpose of determining the feasibility of developing a program that might transform HIV/AIDS in the developing world. So I got to be quite close with President George W. Bush, related not only to the fact that I knew him through his father, but the fact that he took a very keen interest in global HIV/AIDS and allowed me to be one of the architects of the program, which has now transformed HIV globally, the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, or PEPFAR.
Soon after signing PEPFAR, President George W. Bush traveled to Africa. On July 11, 2003, during his five-nation Africa tour, President Bush visited an AIDS clinic in Entebbe, Uganda.
Nearly 30 million people on this continent are living with HIV/AIDS, including 3 million children under the age of 15. More than 4 million people require immediate drug treatment, but just 1% of them are receiving the medicine they require. Africa has the will to fight AIDS, but it needs the resources as well. And this is my country's pledge to the people of Africa and the people of Uganda. You are not alone in this fight. America has decided to act. Over the next 5 years, my country will spend $15 billion on the fight to fight AIDS around the world, with special focus here on the continent of Africa.
4 years later, on July 25, 2007, First Lady Laura Bush addressed the National Press Club. She talked about her own recent trip to Africa and the AIDS initiative.
When President Bush announced PEPFAR at the beginning of 2003, only 50,000 people in sub-Saharan Africa were thought to be receiving antiretroviral treatment. Now, in PEPFAR's 15 focus nations, the United States has helped provide treatment for more than 1 million people. PEPFAR has supported care for more than 2 million orphans and vulnerable children. And in its first 3.5 years, PEPFAR has supported services for pregnant women to avoid transmission of HIV to their babies, preventing more than 100,000 infant infections through March of this year. This direct medical care keeps people in good health, and education is spreading hope. Millions are now learning to live with HIV instead of waiting to die from it. This is the beginning of a long journey. The challenges of this pandemic remain immense, and there's much to be done.
And more was done. PEPFAR was reauthorized the next year, and Laura Bush spoke again at the July 31, 2008 White House bill signing ceremony.
Millions worldwide face the daily reality of illness and death caused by HIV/AIDS. These men, women, and children have now found new courage knowing this, that those who are orphaned, those who are sick, those who have been abandoned will always have a friend in the people of the United States. This is the commitment that PEPFAR has made, and it's a commitment that we reaffirm today. Now the man who began this work of compassion more than 5 years ago, my husband, President George W. Bush.
President Bush singled out for recognition Senator Joe Biden.
This bill embodies the extraordinary compassion of the American people. We are a compassionate nation. And that's what this bill says loud and clear. I want to thank everybody who's helped make this bill possible. I particularly want to thank the members of the House and the Senate who have joined us. I know you're anxious to see the bill signed, so I'm not going to try to name every single name. But I do want to thank Joe Biden and Dick Lugar from the United States Senate, These men worked together in an incredibly constructive way to get the bill moving. I want to thank you.
The two presidents immediately following George W. Bush continued mentioning and funding PEPFAR. Here's Barack Obama on August 3, 2010, hosting a White House town hall meeting with young African leaders from over 40 nations.
You know, I had some disagreements with my predecessor, but one of the outstanding things that President Bush did was to initiate the PEPFAR program. It's a huge investment in battling HIV/AIDS, both with respect to prevention and also with respect to treatment. Billions of dollars were committed. We have built off of that.
And here's President Obama again on December 2nd, 2013, World AIDS Day.
And when I became president, I inherited President Bush's phenomenal program, PEPFAR, which has helped millions around the world receive life-saving treatment.
Next, President Donald Trump. President Trump talked about PEPFAR during his September 19, 2017 address to the United Nations.
We have invested in better health and opportunity all over the world through programs like PEPFAR, which funds AIDS relief.
President Trump talked about PEPFAR again on April 18, 2020. It was during a press briefing with members of the White House Coronavirus Task Force. President Trump spoke right after remarks from coordinator of the task force and former U.S. Global AIDS Coordinator, Dr. Deborah Birx. She was on stage, as was Dr. Anthony Fauci.
The fact is that we've been learning a lot from Deborah and Tony and so many of the professionals, the director. PEPFAR, we're spending the United States, with that help, to the best of my knowledge, mostly in Africa, $6 billion a year. And that's on AIDS. What we've done for AIDS in Africa is unbelievable. We spend $6 billion a year. That's been going on for a long time. Nobody knows that. You've never heard that. I've never heard that. $6 billion a year. Millions of people are living right now and living very comfortably because of the fact that we have found the answer to that horrible, horrible plague. That was a plague. But we spend $6 billion a year. And from what I hear, it's very well spent, done by professionals, including this great professional right here. That was the thing that you worked hardest on and something that was very close to her heart. So it's, it's something that I think people should start hearing.
President Trump's vice president was an early supporter of PEPFAR. Mike Pence spoke about it on the House floor on February 13, 2008, when he was a congressman from Indiana.
Mr. Speaker, I don't need to tell you the HIV/AIDS pandemic has infected more than 60 million people worldwide, killed more than 25 million people, orphaned 14 million in its wake, and today nearly 70% of the people in the world who are afflicted with HIV/AIDS reside in Africa. In 2003, President Bush called on Congress to create a program to address the worldwide HIV/AIDS pandemic. The President's emergency plan for AIDS relief, known as PEPFAR, was an extraordinary bipartisan achievement of compassion.
Finally, we opened with Democratic Senator Joe Biden on July 16, 2008, praising President Bush for PEPFAR. We'll close with another Democratic senator on July 16, 2008 as well, praising President Bush for PEPFAR. This time, the praise comes from a future Secretary of State and President Bush's opponent in the 2004 presidential campaign, John Kerry.
He picked up the cry for some $15 billion, and I will tell everybody that initially many of us had suspicions that that was going to be a public relations effort, not a real one. In fact, I think President Bush has probably transformed this effort into the single most important piece of his legacy. And as Senator Coburn just said, this is perhaps now one of the most important things that the United States is doing on a global basis, and it has made a profound difference.
And now our bonus clip. With all this bipartisan praise for PEPFAR and for President Bush, did its passage have any effect on the partisan tone in Washington? Well, here's what President Bush told C-SPAN in his December 18, 2008 exit interview.
Well, it didn't work out the way I was hoping it would. In other words, the tone didn't It changed some initially. Remember, we got No Child Left Behind done. We worked together on PEPFAR. I mean, there were some bipartisan accomplishments, but the rhetoric got very tough. I mean, this is some people here in this town use the politics of personal destruction to advance their agenda. I don't want to sound self-serving, but I haven't, and I don't think a president should.
That's it for this episode of C-SPAN's The Weekly. A reminder, you can do your own searches in the C-SPAN video library. Find out more about the history of PEPFAR and what other politicians have said about it. Just go to cspan.org and use the search bar on top. Thanks for listening, and happy searching.